Hello, this is the 50th episode of Spare a Thought. Today's episode is part 1 of 2, Monumental Welsh Women. Part 2 will be coming later in the week. I'm trying to make episodes a bit shorter and more digestible for listeners. I appreciate you're busy and often on the move when listening. Thanks for your support. And here's part 1 of Monumental Welsh Women. Hello everyone, and welcome to Spare a Thought, the podcast that shines a light on the people, ideas, issues and organisations that are often overlooked or misrepresented in the media. I'm your co-host for today, Tom Spare, and today I'd like to welcome back my good friend, Emily Merry.
Hello everyone. Tom and I previously collaborated on a mini-series we created called Pearlie's War, based on Tom's grandfather's book of the same name, which explored his time as a Royal Marine and commando during World War II.
Today, we're moving away from war to the monumental contribution of 6 Welsh women who have shaped our nation.
To celebrate International Women's Day and also St. David's Day, which was on the 1st of March, Tom and I are going to focus on 6 women, 4 of whom have been commemorated with statues in Wales, one that is planned and another who campaigners are hoping to create a statue of.
One of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode was I was intrigued to sort of look into how many statues there are and monuments across the UK. So a couple of years ago, the UK Art Project collated photographs. They asked members of the public to collect photographs, and they came back with about 13,500 statues and sculptures across the UK. Roughly 77% of those were men and 17% women, and the other percentage both men and women. And just 2% of the statues recorded were people of colour.
Some years ago, it was concluded that in London alone, there were more statues of animals than women. Since 2020, when a wave of protests and social movements emerged following the murder of George Floyd, there's been a deliberate decision in the UK to commission more statues of women and people of colour.
And a lot of people will say, well, it's just a statue. What does it matter? Who is it of? What they did in the past doesn't really matter. But not to labour the point too much, statues are monuments. They're recognition of a person, the whole person, not just the best parts of their character, but also some of the more negative ones too. History, or his story, is often presented as black and white, good and bad. But what it should be about is providing an accurate record of what took place, what that person represents, and to remember that every monument cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be seen in a wider context.
With that in mind, we turn to a recent petition that has been submitted to the Senedd, or the Welsh Parliament.
So that's right. A school teacher, Nicholas George, wants to recognise a notable Welsh woman. Emily, could you talk a little bit first about the mechanics of the petition system in Wales, and then explore the person he wants to make the statue of, Gwenllian Griffith?
So creating a petition is an effective way to bring a matter of importance to the Senedd and the Welsh Government. So Gwenllian Griffith's petition currently has just under 2,000 signatures at the time of recording.
And how many signatures are needed for a committee to discuss the petition?
You need to have 2 people to support your petition, first of all, and then it has to meet some specific standards. And then the petition committee will review all petitions with over 250 signatures. And if a petition receives over 10,000 signatures, the petitions committee will consider asking for it to be debated in the Senedd chamber.
So who was Gwenllian?
Gwenllian Griffith was considered a Welsh rebel. The youngest daughter of Griffith ap Cynan, the Prince of Gwynedd, she married Griffith ap Rhys, the Prince of Deheubarth, in 1113. Considered a warrior princess, she led an army of Welshmen against the Norman forces in 1136. And when Henry I died, the Welsh seized the lost land. She was betrayed and forced into open battle. So her eldest son died defending her, and she was captured on the battlefield and killed. Revenge for Gwenllian allowed her family to reclaim power. Her youngest son would go on to become Lord Rhys, and a statue in her honour would display her as a symbol of Welsh bravery, sacrifice and resistance.
There is, however, a project that is close to completion that is on a mission to better represent Welsh women in statue form.
The Monumental Welsh Women project is actually a really vital part of this conversation. They're a small team, but they've taken on a huge mission to address the fact that before they started, there wasn't a single outdoor statue of a named real-life Welsh woman anywhere in Wales.
Which I couldn't quite believe, but it's quite shocking, really, isn't it? Given the history of it. And it's an incredible statistic where you think about it. It means Welsh women, girls, simply didn't see the achievements of women reflected in our public spaces at all.
Exactly. So they decided to change that by commissioning 5 statues of 5 different women. They've been incredibly successful so far, having already delivered 4 of them. We've had the iconic Betty Campbell monument in Cardiff, the statue of Elaine Morgan in Mountain Ash, the tribute to Cranogwen in Llangrannog, and most recently in September 2024, the striking statue of Lady Rhondda in Newport.
So they're right on the home stretch then, basically. They're getting close to completion.
Yes, they are. There is only 1 statue left to go to complete their original mission of 5. It's a project that is finally giving these women the permanent physical recognition they've deserved for such a long time.
We've reached out to Monumental Welsh Women project, and their chair, Helen Molyneux, agreed to come onto the show to talk about the project's origins and the women they've chosen to honour. I started by asking her about that initial spark, the moment that they realised just how much of our history was missing from the streets of Wales.
So my name's Helen Molyneux. I'm one of the co-founders of the Monumental Welsh Women project. In my other life, I am a lawyer by training, but I retired in 2016, which was the year we also started the Monumental Welsh Women project. So for me, it was a bit of a project to fill my time whilst I worked out what I was going to do with my retirement. So it all came about as a friend of mine from school is a journalist, Carolyn Hitt, and she had written an article explaining that there were no statues in Wales of real women. So there are plenty of statues of nymphs and angels and mams and, you know, the usual kind of family groupings and this kind of thing. But there wasn't a single statue or in public of what we call a real woman, you know, a named historical woman. And when she was telling me about this, we were having a cup of coffee one day and she was telling me about this article, and I was literally stunned. I didn't believe her to start with. And when I looked into it, I couldn't find one. And then coincidentally, another friend of mine, Kath Roberts, and I had decided to organise a night out with, you know, a group of sort of people that we knew, women that we knew in Cardiff. Just for a change. It was literally like, who do we know that would make a good group of people to have a night out with? And so we invited a load of people that we knew. We had cocktails in the Dead Canary, actually, in Cardiff. And we were talking about Carolyn's article because we were saying how ridiculous it was. And of course, you know what it's like. You have a couple of cocktails and all of a sudden it seems like a really good idea to create a statue of a woman, you know? So all of a sudden we were all very enthusiastic. And as the night went on, we got more and more enthusiastic. So we decided that this was what we were going to do. And strangely, the next morning when we woke up, you know, we still thought it was a good idea. You know, usually you go, oh, well, that was just a load of drunken banter. But there was something about the group of women that were together who were also enthusiastic about it. And I think the other kind of catalyst was that this group of women, you know, were people who could get things done. You know, they were all doing, you know, amazing things in their careers. So we had, well, you know, Kath Roberts, who's now the chair of Eversheds internationally. Carolyn Hitt is head of BBC Radio and Sport. I mean, she wasn't at the time, but, you know, these things have all happened since. Professor Laura McAllister, who I think you've spoken to before. Kerith Mathias, who's a director and producer in the BBC. Ruth Cayford, who's the arts lead in Cardiff Council. So this was a group of women. And you looked around and thought, well, if we can't do something off our own bat, you know, there's no hope. So it was kind of the fact that we had this amazing group of people who were all keen to help. So yeah, so it kind of, that was the catalyst. And then, of course, you think, okay, so how do you actually, you know, get this off the ground? At the same time as this was happening, Central Square in Cardiff was being developed. And one of the things that I knew from kind of previous contacts was that when you've got a big development like that going on somewhere, there's usually a pot of money that has to be set aside for artwork of some sort, or for the public realm, or, whatever it is. I mean, coincidentally, my other half is the developer who was creating Central Square at the time. So I came home and said to him, we're going to erect a statue of somebody. Can we put it on Central Square? And he said, well, if you want to, completely uninterested, yeah, just, whatever. If it deals with a problem that I'd have to deal with, crack on. So that meant we had a location, which is one of the key things, to start a project like this. You have to have some idea of where it's going to go. So then we kind of were a bit sort of committed. So we thought, right, okay, we've got to get this done now.
The woman who topped that first ever public vote was the legendary Betty Campbell. She's now immortalised in Central Square, Cardiff, and for a very good reason. Betty was born in 1934, right in the heart of Bute Town, Tiger Bay, one of the most multicultural and diverse communities in the UK. In the 1940s, at just 11 years old, she won a scholarship to Lady Margaret High School for girls, which was a remarkable achievement. After leaving school in the 1950s, she married and started her family, but her ambition to teach was strong. She applied to Cardiff Teacher Training College in the mid-1960s and she was accepted, becoming one of the first Black Welsh women to train as a teacher, breaking barriers simply by stepping into the classroom. She began teaching in the 1960s, although she faced racism from parents and colleagues, but she continued on. And when she joined Mount Stuart Primary School in Bute Town, she found the place where she could truly make a difference. In 1973, Betty Campbell became Wales's first black headteacher, taking charge of Mount Stuart Primary School. It was a historic appointment, and she used it to transform the school. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Betty developed Mount Stuart Primary School into a pioneering centre of multicultural education. She taught the pupils about Black history, about the civil rights movement, about the Caribbean and the continent of Africa. She introduced lessons on slavery and empire at a time when most British schools avoided the subject entirely. Her goal was very simple. She wanted to see every child reflected in the stories that they learned, and her influence reached far beyond the classroom. She was a member of the Home Office's Race Advisory Committee, helping shape national policy on race relations. She also served on the Commission for Racial Equality, bringing her experience as a teacher and community leader into the heart of government discussions. She was also a councillor for Bute Town, fighting for local housing, supporting youth clubs, and working to preserve the history of Tiger Bay and Bute Town when redevelopment threatened to erase it. After more than 25 years as a head teacher, Betty retired in 1999, but she didn't slow down. She continued mentoring teachers, speaking at events, and championing diversity in Welsh education. Her decades of service were formally recognised in 2003 when she was awarded an MBE for her contributions to education and community life. Betty Campbell sadly passed away in October 2017 at the age of 82. By then, she had become a national figure, a symbol of resilience, pride and possibility. In September 2021, Wales honoured her with something truly historic, the first statue of a named real woman in the country's history. Sculpted by Eve Shepherd, it shows Betty surrounded by children, stories and symbols of her heritage. The teacher still guiding us, even in bronze.
So it's one thing to recognise sort of the gap in representation, but quite another to narrow down centuries of history in just 5 names. So I asked Helen how they actually went about the selection process.
Because originally our plan was to do one statue. That was it, because we thought that was probably enough. It's one of those things, when you start to think about it, you think, actually, we've taken on a big, thing here. Because if this is going to be the only statue in the whole of Wales of a real woman, how are we going to decide who that should be? Who deserves that honour, So we pulled together a couple of historians, and we asked Professor Angela John to join our group and Dr. Ellen Jones, historians. We did a load of research on, women who could potentially kind of fulfill the criteria. Coincidentally, at the same time, it was coming up to the anniversary of some women getting the vote in 2018. In 1918. So obviously the anniversary was in 2018. And the Women's Equality Network in Wales were doing a thing on putting together a list of 100 Welsh women who deserved sort of recognition. So we got in touch with them and worked with them on drafting up a list of 50, because they had 50 historical women and 50 women who were still alive. We decided straight off that our statue would be of somebody historical. We wouldn't do one of somebody who was already still alive. So we worked with them to kind of produce this long list of 50 historical women, which in itself was great fun, because you start to realise there are so many interesting women who've done so many amazing things in Wales that you've never heard of. I'd never heard of most of them. So that was great, because that was our kind of long list, and it had a bit of respectability, I guess, because we put it together with the Welsh Equality Network, the Women's Equality Network, and there was an event at the Senedd where those 50 women were all, exhibited. So then we kind of thought, well, if we can narrow it down to 5 from that shortlist, we can then hold some sort of vote to try to decide who should be the woman in Central Square. And this is where, this group of women were so amazing, because, how do you hold a public vote? It's like, you think, well, we don't know how to do that. It's impossible. And Carolyn and Kerith both said, why don't we ask the BBC to do it for us? Why don't we say to them, make programmes about these 5 women on the shortlist, and then have a public vote, and, then the winner will be the person who gets the statue. So they went off to the BBC and asked Geraint Alvin Davies if he'd be interested in commissioning these little programmes. And he said yes. So, it's like the power of contacts, that you can use in these situations. So the BBC very kindly commissioned the little films that we did. They were shown on BBC Wales Today, I think it was, over a week's period. And then they held a public vote. And one of the things I'm proudest about in this project is that we had more votes for our statue through the BBC poll than they had for the Sports Personality of the Year. So it really caught people's imagination. People were really, because we did lots of promotion on social media and that kind of thing. And people were just really enthused by it, So, but to get to that 5, what we did then was we convened a kind of committee to select the 5 from the 50, and we got loads of different people involved in that. We had Tanni Gray Thompson, we had Terrace Matthews, some council leaders, a politician, various people. So we tried to keep a good mix of people in everything we did. And we spent a day going through the long list and people talking about who their favourites were and why they met the criteria. And what was difficult was, when you're thinking there's only going to be one statue, it's like, what is the criteria? Because you can't pick, there's no such thing as the best woman. Do you know what I mean? The only woman in Wales who deserves a statue. So we basically said we wanted somebody who kind of represented, the qualities of all of these other women, that they were innovative and inspiring and ambitious and had achieved something, incredible. And, through that process, we narrowed it down to basically our favourite 5 from the list that we had. And that was the 5 then that were put to the vote. So that was Lady Rhondda, Cranogwen, Elaine Morgan, Elizabeth Andrews, and Betty Campbell. And of course, Betty Campbell won that vote. And that in itself was incredible, because by the time we held that vote in 2018, I think that was, people starting to look at statues and saying, why are these statues, of these people there, and where's the broader representation? So, we had no idea that was going to happen when we started our project, but we just, through pure, kind of luck of timing, that was all going on while we were creating the first statue of a woman in Wales, but also of a the first black head teacher in Wales. So it was incredible timing for us, and we just seemed to catch people's imaginations. So that's kind of how it all started and how we got to the first statue.
So these aren't just historical markers, they are significant pieces of public art. I wanted to know how the project collaborated with artists to ensure these statues didn't just look like the women, but actually captured their spirit. So I asked Helen just this.
Because there'd been this whole discussion about statues and their value, and, and it wasn't seen as a very modern thing to do, to create a statue of a person. So we really had to think hard about how we approached that. And, to be honest, my attitude was I wanted these women to look like they looked. I wanted people to look at them and say, this is what this woman looked like when she was doing all her amazing things. Because I think, one of the issues for women is that people look at them and assume that they can't do a load of things, So it was very important that their likeness was real. But we also realised that this was probably one of the few opportunities we had to tell this woman's story, because people wouldn't necessarily go away and look her up or read a book about her. So we did want the statue to tell the story of, why she deserved a statue. So we were very specific about the brief we gave to the artist, which was that it couldn't just be a woman on a plinth. It had to tell their story and encompass their kind of spirit and their achievements. And the kind of thing we always said was it has to be the place in that town where people go to take a selfie. So it has to be kind of, iconic or something that really people will want to go and see. And it's one of the things that I'm proudest of is every time I walk past the Betty Campbell statue, there's somebody there looking at it and really looking at all the details and taking the picture. And I just think, and it's become the place to meet in Cardiff as well. It's a real landmark already.
That's cool, yeah. And how did you identify the artists? Like, where did you source them from?
So it was a combination of approaches, really. So for Betty, we held a kind of open competition. So we invited artists to present their ideas to us, and we had we set up another committee of different people to hold. So we shortlisted the artists who submitted their ideas down to 3, and we asked them to prepare a maquette of their designs, and then we set up another group of people to choose to have these maquettes presented to them by the artists, and then choose the artist. And that was one of the best days ever. It still sticks in my mind so much because we had Betty's son and daughter on the panel, and it was incredible because the first 2 artists that came in, their statues were beautiful, but they weren't quite hitting the marks for some reason. And then Eve Shepherd, who was the sculptor who did the Betty monument, came in, and she had 2 maquettes with her. And she said, I've made 2 because the one I can do within the budget, but I've done the one that I would really like to do, but it completely blows the budget. So you might not want to have that one. So we said, okay, well, show us the one you can do for the budget then, first of all. And she kind of pulled the cloth off this little maquette. And it was amazing, but it was a head and shoulders of Betty. And so we all said, oh yeah, and it looked like her and it was really nice. And she said, but this is the one I'd really like to do. And she pulled the cloth off the maquette of the one that she's actually done with all the tree and the children and the details. And Simon, who's Betty's son, literally said, oh, it's my mum. And it was like literally the hairs on the back of our necks stood up. Elaine, who's Betty's daughter, was kind of, she had tears raining down her face. And it was just the most amazing moment because she'd caught, Betty's likeness amazingly well, but also just the whole spirit and character of the woman was there, in front of us. So it was fantastic. It was an amazing moment. But of course, it was double the budget, which was a bit of a problem. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was way, way, way over the budget. But of course, having seen it, and having the family members literally saying, no, that's the one, it has to be that one. So then we committed then to doing that, statue and raising the money for it, which was no mean feat, to say the least. But I'm so glad we did, though, because I think it's just an incredible piece of work. For the other statues, then we, for some, we actually approached one of the artists who'd submitted work for the Betty Campbell one. We loved her work, but she didn't quite hit the brief on that one. So we used her for one of the others. For Cranogwen in Llangrannog, there was a local artist, Seb Boyson, and because we worked very closely with the community in Llangrannog to get that statue fundraised for and created, they wanted to use Seb because he was local and he understood the community, and he'd already created a statue of St. Crannog, which was in Llangrannog. So that was the decision on that one. So it was very much, we kind of did, what suited the project at the time, depending on each statue.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that the Betty Campbell statue, there's not many that make you stop and just go over and look at it and spend a lot of time. And every time you visit, find something different on it because there's so much detail.
Yeah.
And the fact it is so central as well, it's where people are going, obviously, to travel, to meet people, or obviously it's a busy environment. I went to the School of Journalism as well, so it was always nearby, and there's bus stops there and everything, and the bus station. So it's really at the intersection of Cardiff. But it's one of the few statues that really stick in my mind. I think there's a statue at Waterloo station about Windrush, which is two people there, and that's incredible. And obviously you have some of the sort of iconic statues in various places, a lot of them in London. So I think it's such a cool project for it to be Welsh women, people who contributed to Welsh society, rather than what a lot of the statues are of, like, the Bute family, or people who contributed to society but also massively enriched themselves. And I think that says a lot about the difference between a lot of the statues that are in Wales, made of people because they thought they were important enough to have one, versus those people who haven't had statues and people think they're important enough to have a statue.
They deserve one, or just their stories are so interesting that they should be better known.
Yeah, exactly. They should have a sort of wider audience.
One of those names that felt absolutely essential was Margaret Haig Thomas, better known as Lady Rhondda. Her statue was unveiled in Newport in September 2024. She's famous for her militant suffrage work, including the well-known story of the post box in Risca. Margaret Haig Thomas was born in London in 1883. When she was 25, she joined the Women's Social and Political Union, becoming secretary of its Newport branch. She campaigned for women's suffrage across South Wales. One of her most recognisable feats was when she tried to ignite a Royal Mail letterbox with a chemical bomb. She was arrested and sentenced to prison for her militant suffrage campaigning, and during this time she was one of several suffragettes to go on hunger strike and participated in what is known as the Cat and Mouse Act, where suffragettes would go on hunger strike, they would be released and re-imprisoned. So when her father died, a lord, she attempted to take his seat in the House of Lords, but her membership was later rejected. She was the director of several businesses and was known as one of the best businesswomen in Britain. In 1920, she was one of the first 4 women to become justices of the peace in the county of Monmouth, and she advocated for equal pay and opportunity for women.
Quick question. When you were doing history at school, what sort of things were you talking about? What things were you learning? Doing much about Welsh history?
No, not at all. In year 7, we looked at the Battle of Hastings, 1066. In year 8, I had a supply teacher for most of the year and we watched horrible histories. In year 9 was where I fell in love with history. because I had an amazing teacher, we looked at suffragettes, the Titanic. And then for my history GCSE, I did Germany, American, like foreign policy, and South Africa apartheid. And then for my A-levels, we looked at a bit of Wales. We looked at Henry VIII. Yeah, what he did to Wales, dissolution of the monasteries. So I've never really studied Welsh history. I did a little bit of it at university, but none in school.
That's wild. I think it's slightly different. The curriculum has been redesigned, hasn't it? So it's more inclusive of like Welsh history. Were you familiar with any of these women before doing this episode?
No, none of them. Only bits that would relate to the suffragettes. Like I knew about the post box bomb, but I didn't know who did it. I didn't know that it was based in South Wales or that there even was a Welsh branch of the WSPU.
Okay, that's sort of interesting itself, isn't it? That focus on the spirit of the women involved is so evident in the statue of Elaine Morgan in Mountain Ash. It's a beautiful, thoughtful piece that reflects her incredible career as a writer and evolutionary theorist. And looking at her CV, as we'll find out, she had a really varied career. So she grew up in Pontypridd, only child of a colliery pumpsman. She was clever, bookish, and in 1939 she became the first pupil from her school to go to Oxford University. But she arrived at Oxford with a very pronounced Valleys accent, and a lot of the people that study and work there just assumed that she was a cleaner. But she actually became a star-studied student instead, chairing the Oxford University Democratic Socialist Club and mixing with future cabinet ministers as well. After graduating, she taught with the Workers' Education Association. She married, had 3 sons, and she began writing plays. Her first television scripts were accepted before she even owned a TV set, which is quite wild. And TV really sort of kicked off after the Queen's coronation, where lots of people ended up buying TV sets because they were a lot more expensive than the radio. And the BBC, who were sort of the primary creators of radio, just as a bit of content of TV, were started as an organisation with radio and then adopted TV later. Over a 30-year career, Elaine became one of the most celebrated screenwriters in British television, winning BAFTAs for Testament of Youth and Marie Curie, the Prix Italia for Joey, and creating beloved Welsh dramas like How Green Was My Valley and The Life and Times of Lloyd George. But she had a complete switch in the 1970s to focus on science. So she took on the male-dominated establishment with a revolutionary theory of human evolution. I don't quite know how you go from being a scriptwriter to then... I want to know her secrets. Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it? So she wrote the book The Descent of Woman, which argued that human evolution wasn't just about the mighty male hunter, but also females were an equally vital part of the story. It became a global bestseller and a key text in the women's liberation movement. She went on to write several more books of all sort of focused on science, and she was championed by Sir David Attenborough. And her TED Talk at the age of 89 has been viewed 1.5 million times. She was appointed an OBE in 2009, elected to the Royal Society of Literature in the same year. And her statue was created by artist Emma Rogers and was unveiled in Mountain Ash in March 2022. So that's the end of part 1. In part 2 of this episode, we'll hear from Helen about the logistics of putting the project together, the life of campaigner Elizabeth Andrews, the poet and mariner Cranogwen, and the future of the Monumental Women project. You can find out more information at monumentalwelshwomen.com. And if you want to support the petition for Princess Gwenllian, you can find that on the Senev's petition website.
These women captained their own ships, educated, agitated, and organised, challenged the establishment, and changed the world. Their stories deserve to be told, retold, and carved in bronze for generations to come. Huge thank you to Helen for joining us and sharing the incredible work of Monumental Welsh Women.
The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow, credit and thanks to Afro Cluster, Magugu, and Asher Jane. Spare of Four is a Be the Change Media Network production. I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Emily Merry.
Thanks for listening.
Whether you like them or not, young shall grow. Better fill them with love. Then them go know. In this life you don't give up. Even when you know, if you fall, get back up. Young shall grow. Whether you like them or not, young shall grow. Better fill them with love. Then them go know. In this life you don't give up. Even when